Hi everybody. I wanted to go over some things about 70 AD, and this was 40 years after Jesus. The walls of Jerusalem are here, and here's the temple, and here's Herod's palace and a few different towers, another tower over here. Antonius, that's a kind of a major deal there. Now this wall right here, it wasn't there at the time of Jesus, so Jesus is probably put on the cross here or here. This white line, that's where Titus built a line around the city. In Luke, 23, and there followed him a great company of people and women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus turned to them and he said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, wombs that have never bore, and the paps that have never given suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and the hills cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in a dry? Jesus is the true life. He's the vine. He's the one where all life comes from. But if they're doing this to him who is living, what are they going to do to these that are dry and dead? And remember, they accepted a murderer and a liar and rejected Jesus. Pontius Pilate didn't even want to crucify Jesus. But what he did was gave him a choice. Look, you can take this murderer that's on death row here, or you can take Jesus. Take your pick. Well, they chose not Jesus, but they chose a murderer and a robber. Well, what's interesting is 40 years later, that's exactly what they got. I forgot to tell you, is this book Josephus? He was a Jewish historian that was there at the time. Florus, he was ruling in there. There was problems with taxes. Well, he went right into the temple and took taxes, which he shouldn't have done. That caused even more rebellion. Jews were killed. Romans were killed. It ended up that the Jews got the Roman garrisons out of here, out of Jerusalem, and they had killed 700 Roman women and children. The garrison at Masada had been killed, the Romans there. Vespasian, he came down, and he was to quell this rebellion, and with him came his son Titus. And they had the legions, the 5th, 12th, and 15th Legion, and the 10th Legion. There was blood from one end to another with these rebellions going on. Josephus is the one that told Vespasian he would be the next emperor, which Vespasian didn't believe it. He didn't even have eyes on wanting to be the emperor. But lo and behold, there was such rebellions in the Roman Empire also that in the year 69, they call it the year of the 4 emperors. So these different emperors until finally Vespasian, but Vespasian was very smart. He made sure he had Egypt because Egypt supplied the grains. So Tiberius Alexander from Egypt, that was a governor there, he supported him. So once he had that support, he had to go to Rome, and then his son Titus was left as the general. Eleazar, see, they had taken the 12th Roman Legion, ambushed it and killed, it said they killed 6,000. You had him here. He basically took over this area. It was John that took over. John took over inside, and John, he was up in the Galilee area and came back down here and took over. And then you had Simon. He had been staying at Masada where they had killed the Romans over there and different places. He went down south, kind of fighting the Idumeans, like Edom. That comes from the Edomites. A sect of the Zealots was the Sicarii. Actually, I don't know how you say it. It looks like Sicarii, but it might be pronounced something different. But they had these curved little knives, and they had those under their cloaks. So they were like some of the original cloak and dagger, that they would kill the moderates. They ended up letting Simon come in. They let him in, and then what they were doing was calling him Savior. He did the same thing that John was doing. They were taking anything they wanted within the city, taking the properties, taking the gold, taking the women, everything for theirself, setting up mock trials and having people killed. but they were fighting each other, throwing bodies over the edge into the Kidron Valley here and the Hinnom Valley. They were throwing people over, so there was lots of dead people, filling houses full of dead people. There were so many of them, they couldn't even bury them. Jesus talked about this whole thing going to come down. There wouldn't be a stone on another, that if they say, here's the Christ, there he is, don't believe him. About false rumors of false prophets, false Christs, rumors of wars and earthquakes and stuff. Well, actually, all that stuff was happening here. There was even miracles that they saw. Josephus writes that they actually saw armies in the sky, that there was a star above for a year that looked like a sword, that one man had gone around Jerusalem for 7 years, 5 months, shouting, "Woe to Jerusalem." The Jews beat him, tried to have him stop, but he gets right back up and continues again. And then so they turned him over to the Romans. The Romans beat him. The wounds were going right to the bone. And he still got up and continued to say, "Woe to Jerusalem," along this time. They had one of the doors at the east side here that takes 20 men to open. Well, it opened on its own, which Josephus said that they kind of were so self-centered they didn't realize that these were speaking against him. Here comes Titus, and he comes up here. They're up at Scopus because Mount Scopus is higher, and then they come around here, and Josephus is working with them. And Titus has the 5th, 12th, and 15th Legion. And over here they set the 10th Legion, which up here is the Mount of Olives. Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives up here, and then this big valley, and then here. Titus tried to get them just to surrender peacefully, and he was willing to let them go. There's over 1 million people here, and this is at the Passover. Anybody who is willing to go peacefully to Rome, these guys are killing. It took them 2 to 3 weeks to get over this first wall, and then this second wall they got over, and then there was fighting and skirmishes there. Now these rebels had gotten siege engines too, because they had captured them from the Romans earlier. They brought them in here. The 10th Roman Legion was very good with their siege engines, catapults. Another thought is about the book of Revelations, because a lot of the things in Revelations, a lot of people think are happening later. So people always look at the things that are happening at their time frame, and they try to put that on Revelations. But it might not be so. It may be that Revelations, a lot of it, was actually speaking of this huge thing that was about to happen. And I know Revelations talks about a hailstorm that hits with a 100-pound hail. Well, the Romans were actually catapulting in their stones that were white. In fact, they actually later had to paint those stones black because the Jews inside, the rebels, could see them coming too easy, so they painted them black. They ended up coming to Antonia, which was here by the temple. They finally got through some of that stuff there, but they had a heck of a time. They had set up some siege engines there. They had dug under the siege engines, and then they would put their wooden posts up under there in braces. And then they ended up burning it, and then that whole siege engine collapses. The Romans were like devastated that those had happened, because see, around the whole place, around Jerusalem, they actually cut down trees for 9 or 10 miles. They had cut down trees around Jerusalem because it took so much wood. Titus, he was actually crucifying like 500 people a day, thinking that if he scared them enough, they would quit. But these guys were like wild men. They would not quit. Of course, they were killing their own people, and there was so many dead in these places that even Josephus said that Titus raised his hands up to God and said, "God, this is not of me." And think about that. Titus is a pagan. The pagans, they're worshiping other things. They're going by superstitions. When Jesus was there, there were a couple of soldiers that you see stories of that came to Jesus, that when they saw Jesus, they knew he was the truth. And they knew that they could go to him, and that what he was doing really came from God. Titus Even though he was pagan and did not know God like this way, he still did not want to offend God. He was doing the best he can, even though he only knew pagan practices. These mercenaries, what they were doing, they found out that some of these people were leaving because they would leave, but they had swallowed gold. So they found out these guys were going to the bathroom, and then all of a sudden they got this gold. Well, when they found out that, I can't remember if it was 2,000 of them, that the soldiers cut open the stomachs and took the gold out. And when Titus found out about it, he was outraged, and he threatened to have anybody killed that did that. Robbers, the rebels, had been fighting each other, destroyed their food supply, and so these guys were starving. So they built a wall to detain them in, and along the same time they were continuing to do sieges. And Titus told them, look, you guys, if you really want to fight and you will not stop fighting, let's at least fight away from the temple. Titus did everything he could to save the temple. Even though Titus did not want this burnt down, one of the soldiers threw a fire. It went in, it caught on, and fires caught. The Jewish themselves actually melted down a lot of their holy objects. Not all of them, because I know in Rome you have the arch where Titus, you can see the stuff that Titus brought out, so he was able to bring out some of the stuff. Josephus writes of 1,100,000 Jews being killed, and then another 97,000 of them that were put into slavery, sold as slaves. From that time on, the Jews have never done their sacrifices. That you are a living temple, holy unto God. The temple was going to be not a temple built by hands like this, but a temple that was made up of people fit together, precious stones fit together as a temple of God, that God would be in them. It's easy to turn to Jesus. You don't have to go to a church. If you turn to Jesus, you are the church. You're those stones fit together that's a temple, that He loves you, He made you, He's in you. So you can turn to Jesus at any time, and you can go get baptized. I certainly didn't want to be baptized to a building. I wanted Jesus. And so somebody baptized me out in a river in Grovont in Wyoming. And you can have another Christian friend even baptize you. It's a symbol of the death and being alive in Christ again. So that's what He does for us. So I hope that helps you a little bit. So God bless you.